Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. This is so wonderful to see all of your faces this morning. This is the happiest and most attentive group of people I have ever seen in our sanctuary at TBS. Chris, can you pan around? The people at home got to see this. Look at all those smiles. And I see we have some special guests in the crowd today, too. Rabbi Lewis, it's nice to have you back in your seat. Man, I would love to hear your sermon this year. I wonder what you'd say. Mitch Albaum, good to see you back here, too, at TBS. Who else do we have this morning? Gritty, I didn't know you observed Rosh Hashanah. Just please keep it clean, okay? But I did know you observed Rosh Hashanah, Sandy Koufax. Honored to have you here with us today. And I see right next to you Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg of blessed memory. That sad news that we received this morning. I know Rabbi Lindemann already spoke earlier today about your life and your legacy, but I know that you'll continue to be an inspiration to all of us, and especially to young women for many years to come. You know, we have 3 different people purchase a holiday head of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which just speaks to her impact in our world, and we know her memory will be for a blessing. Do you hear something? What? Hey, guys, Statler, Waldorf, no heckling. Come on, it's Rosh Hashanah. All right? All right, thank you. And look at that, right down there, a hometown face. Minnesota Twins Hall of Famer Rod Carew. Rod, it's so good to see you here. But I'm sorry, I think you're actually in Rachel's seat. Yeah, she's not going to be happy about that. I think if you could just, well, all right, so talk to Ron. Talk to Ron about it. I'm sure he'll work it out. He's right over there to the side there. Good. All right, there he is. Excellent. Ron, can you work that out? Wonderful. Thank you. It's a weird year. I hope all of you at home are finding ways to make these very different holidays meaningful this year. And just in case you're wondering, we are not wearing masks here on the Bima because the sanctuary is virtually empty. And much of our services were pre-recorded so we could include more people and keep everyone safe. Right now, however, I'm coming to you live with no tape delay, so who knows what'll happen. And though these holiday heads are fun, I miss you. We miss you. It's not the same without you. And it's hard to believe that it's already been 7 months since we have fully gathered here at TBS, in person, for services, classes, simchas, programs, and other experiences. Though we have been physically distant, we are spiritually close. Being together virtually helps us to stay connected, to learn together, to celebrate together, and to support one another. You know, deciding to go virtual for the High Holy Days was just one of the many challenging decisions we've all had to make this year. It's hard to know what is safe and how to balance safety with sanity. For ourselves and our families, we've wondered, should we have play dates, go out to dinner, see friends, go to the grocery store, travel to see family? And our institutions and businesses have wondered too, is there a way to safely gather together for services? How can we open safely? Should schools have in-person learning? What's the right and the safe thing to do? Who could have imagined what has happened in 5780? We knew we had some serious problems, but a pandemic? Quarantine, masks, virtual school and shul, postponed or different celebrations, limits on travel, job losses, economic hardship. Talk about the old Yiddish expression, man plans and God laughs. But we know that COVID-19 is no laughing matter. It has led to nearly 950,000 deaths throughout the world, and almost 200,000 deaths in our own country. And the COVID-19 angel of death has visited our community too. We have lost members of our TBS family to this virus. How do we even begin to reflect on a year like this? Especially when there's still no vaccine, no clear treatment, and no real end in sight. Today is Rosh Hashanah, which is also called Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment. It's a day when we consider how our actions have impacted our lives, our families, and our world. During this time, there's been one well-known Jewish teaching that has been on my mind. That's because it articulates the challenge of knowing when to put ourselves first and when to put others first. It comes from Pirkei Avot. Hillel taught, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Uchshe ani la'atzmi, ma ani. If I'm only for myself, what am I? V'im lo achshav, imatai. And if not now, when? The first two lines of this teaching set up a tension we often feel. When should I act with my best interests in mind, and when should I put aside my best interests for the sake of others? When do I prioritize myself, and when do I put myself second for the sake of my family, my community, my world? Have you felt this tension this year? Have you struggled with how your needs might conflict with the common good? Well, each of Hillel's questions has its time. Today it feels like we could use a lot more we and a lot less me. We, not me. Rachel has been using this phrase with her students at Kalman Brown Academy. It cultivates a sense of community and responsibility towards one another in the school. Coach Sean McVay also used this phrase to create a team-first culture for the Los Angeles Rams, and players credit it with bringing them to the Super Bowl in 2017, but I'm sure it'll have no impact on their game against the Eagles tomorrow. While there are certainly times that we must heed Hillel's first teaching, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Times when we should put ourselves first. Today it is Hillel's second teaching, if I'm only for myself, what am I? That resonates. Too much me and not enough we can break down a society. This is the argument that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs makes in his new book, Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. He writes, divisive politics, inequitable economics, the loss of openness in universities, and the growth of depression and drug abuse are the result of cultural climate change. They are the long-term consequences of the experiment embarked upon throughout the West a half-century ago, the move from we to me. The solution, Rabbi Sachs writes, is to recover our shared moral compass, to rediscover the life-transforming truths that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, that it becomes invulnerable when it cares for the vulnerable. There is no liberty without morality, no freedom without responsibility, no viable me without the sustaining we. If I'm only for myself, what am I? What are we? Ours is not the first generation that has had too much me and not enough we. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville visited America from France to see our new democracy. Of his many fascinating observations, one particularly speaks to us today. Tocqueville thought that one of the greatest threats to democracy in America was individualism, which he defined as a situation in which people become strangers to the fate of all the rest. For the individualist, Tocqueville thought, families and close friends constitute the whole of mankind. He may feel close to his fellow citizens, but he does not see them. He touches them, but does not feel them. He exists only in himself, and for himself alone. What we see today is what Tocqueville feared. The fallacious debate over wearing masks is but one example. One wears a mask because medical professionals believe it will protect the wearer and the people she meets. It's uncomfortable and annoying, but protecting life, sakana nefashot, is a preeminent Jewish value. If there is even a chance it would protect a life, then it takes precedence over our individualistic concerns. But we know that wearing a mask is just part of the issue. We know there is deep polarization in our society, and each side not only has different opinions, but different facts. Distortions, deceptions, and outright lies are claimed as truth. And deepening inequality, violence, depression, and addiction, immigrant families torn apart, wildfires and climate change, and a whole host of other issues weigh on us this year. And since the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and too many other Black Americans by police, Black Lives Matter protests for racial justice have awakened many of us to the need to strive harder to make the systemic changes necessary to fight racial inequality. Hillel teaches that we can't only be for ourselves. If we are, then what are we? What would this say about us and our community? We must include others. The immigrant and the stranger, as the Torah reminds us 36 times. We must include minorities and victims of racism, hatred, and bigotry. We includes the poor, the hungry, and the abused. If I'm only for myself, what am I? What are we? Our Machzor reinforces Hillel's teaching and reminds us of the importance of we, not me. Nearly all of the prayers we say today, like nearly all of the prayers we say every day, are in the plural. Zochrenu l'chaim. Remember us for life. Avinu malkeinu, our Father, our King. Aleinu l'shabeach. We rise to praise. And on Yom Kippur, even those confessions are in the plural. Ashamnu, we are guilty. Al chet shechatanu, we have sinned. Though many of the sins we confess do not apply to us, we still take responsibility for them. Why is this? Shouldn't we just confess the things for which we are individually responsible and pray for our own individual needs? The Talmud already asked these questions, and they come in a discussion about Tfilat HaDerech, the traveler's prayer. This prayer was originally written in the first person singular, asking God to guide me to my destination and to lead me in peace. But the 3rd century Babylonian sage Abaye disagreed with this language, saying, at all times a person should associate herself with the congregation and should not pray for herself alone. And because of Abaye's statement, the traveler's prayer to this day is said in the plural, even when we travel alone. The medieval commentator Rashi says this is because when we pray on behalf of others, we have a better chance of having our own prayers answered. That's because when we are aware of the needs of others, then our own needs can be put into perspective. And then we realize that we can make a difference in other people's lives. One of the blessings of this pandemic has been seeing the heroic actions of frontline workers. Doctors, nurses, teachers, grocery store workers, delivery drivers, and others have cared for us, nurtured us, and provided us with essential items. Our High Holy Day honors this year are for those members of our TBS family who have been on the front lines of this pandemic. We debuted our montage of honorees at the end of the Torah service. If you missed it, don't worry. We'll post it to Facebook and send it out after the holiday. We are blessed with so many people, those pictured and those not, who have made a positive difference in hospitals, doctors' offices, classrooms, and stores. They have been doing their holy work with compassion, persistence, and a sense of duty. To all of you, we say thank you. Your example has inspired all of us. You exemplify we, not me. Let me share one moving story of heroism during this pandemic. It is not about a person from our congregation, though I know there are many stories like this I could share. Kashif Chaudhry and Naila Shireen bonded over their love of helping others. The two met on medical mission trips around the world. He is a heart doctor at Cedar Rapids Mercy Hospital in Iowa, and she is the chief resident rotating between hospitals in Brooklyn. Their lavish two-day wedding was planned for the end of March in London. Then everything changed. Instead of waiting, they decided to get married as soon as possible. So Chaudhry rushed off to New York, and they had a small, socially distanced family wedding. No hugs, no handshakes, no dancing. They had planned to have a honeymoon. Instead, just 12 hours after their ceremony, Chaudhry headed back to his hospital in Iowa, and Shireen to hers in New York. And Chaudhry said this about his wife: "I was very proud of her. I knew this was very important. She said that this was her ethical and moral responsibility. Public health comes first, especially for us as healthcare workers. I never thought this was going to be our story," he said, "but this is what it is, and it's the right thing to do." That's we, not me. How many of you have had to change plans these last months? For weddings, bar bat mitzvahs, graduations, brises, and baby namings. Funerals have been limited and live-streamed, shivas virtual. And as disappointing and difficult as these necessary changes have been, there have been blessings in them. Virtual shivas have allowed people from around the world to attend and share stories to comfort families. And as one mother of the bride told me at their beautiful but smaller than imagined wedding, not having to worry about the party details forced them to focus on what really mattered: family, close friends, the Jewish ceremony and traditions, and the bride and groom, whose most important day is not their day of the wedding, but every day after. If I'm only for myself, what am I? What we are is learning to live in this new abnormal with an attitude of we, not me. It's understanding why we pray in the plural. Speaking of prayer, here we are at our virtual services. What do you think so far? Say whatever you want. I can't hear you, but I can see you. Not really, but not being able to hear you sing, to hear you talk, to hear you snore, has been one of the more challenging things for me during this time. It reminds me of that old joke: if Greenberg goes to shul to talk to God, why does Schwartz go to shul? To talk to Greenberg. But it's much harder to talk to Greenberg today. As a result of this Hora'at Sha'ah, these extraordinary circumstances, we have made, with the guidance of the conservative movement, some drastic ritual changes. How do you feel watching services on a screen today, using a computer? Logging in to high holiday services is a strange feeling. I know I'm feeling it. Last April was the first time I used a computer on Shabbat in more than 20 years. I felt the tension in Hillel's teaching. But the choice was clear. It had to be we, not me. And thank God we have this technology. Imagine how much more difficult this pandemic would be without it. Zoom has allowed us to continue learning, praying, and celebrating Shabbat and holidays and simchas safely. Still, I often wonder about the long-term impact. In a world where we are so enslaved to our devices, Shabbat is more important than ever to free us from our technological oppression. And while virtual experiences have allowed us to stay connected, we know that it's not the same as singing together, learning together, and being together in person. Once this is all over, how will we utilize the blessings of technology to better connect with each other? How will our rituals and our observance of mitzvot change? What lessons will we have learned? What will we look like next year, 5 years from now, 20 years from now? I often wonder about all these questions. But the good news is that Judaism and the Jewish people have always been resilient. With each tragedy we have suffered, each challenging time we have encountered, we have figured out not only how to survive, but to thrive. After the destruction of the first temple, Ezra and the returning exiles renewed Torah. When the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai led a rabbinic revolution that saved Judaism. The Crusades and the expulsion from Spain led to a deeper exploration of Jewish mysticism. And the Holocaust, our greatest modern tragedy, was followed by the rebirth of the State of Israel. This is what our ancestors were able to do. And their example inspires us today as we build upon their story, our story. We live in a time of great uncertainty, but we are not the first generation to face this uncertainty. Many before us have faced much worse. And like them, we know that if we stay true to our values and our history, then our creativity and innovation during this time will help our community grow and thrive for many more years to come. We, not me. And this lesson about the power of Jewish community to impact lives in the Jewish future is also taught every day in our South Jersey Jewish community. I am proud of how TBS, along with our Federation, the Saltzman Foundation, JFCS, JCF, and other Jewish communal organizations have stepped up to be there for all of us. The strength that comes from standing together as a community is particularly important in our world today, not only for a pandemic, but in so many other ways as well. And there's one that's been on my mind in particular. If you were to ask me back in March, before we closed our building and the world changed, what I would be talking about on Rosh Hashanah this year, I would have said anti-Semitism. Our very last public program at TBS was called Responding to Anti-Semitism in America Today with the Anti-Defamation League's Deputy Director, Kenneth Jacobson. And since then, anti-Semitic incidents have only increased. Attacks on Orthodox Jews in synagogues, swastikas and signs on roadsides, the revival of old canards and conspiracy theories about Jews spreading COVID-19 and manipulating the world economy have proliferated. White supremacists have become more brazen and public in their attacks, and there are those on the right who have allowed their abhorrent views into the mainstream, while there are also those on the left who've been too tolerant of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel attitudes on their side. As Jews, we must say we, not me, when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel. This means not only pointing fingers at the other side's offenses, but also calling out anti-Semitism and condemning it, no matter who says it or where it comes from. And we each have a special responsibility to do it when it comes from our own ideological side. If we don't do it ourselves, who will do it for us? Remember Hillel's teaching. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? In reflecting on these questions these past months, I've realized that they can be read not only as articulating a tension between our needs and the needs of others. Hillel's second question can also be read as an answer to the first. If I'm only for myself, what am I? We are most fully ourselves when we are not only for ourselves. On Rosh Hashanah, we begin with me, and then we move to we. We search our hearts for what we did wrong, and we try to make amends with our Creator and with our family and our friends. But it doesn't stop there. We must also reach beyond ourselves. If I'm only for myself, what am I? What are we? Here's a story about someone who learned this lesson. He wanted it to be only about me, but learned that it's really about we. Chris Waddell was a promising young skier. When he was 20 years old, a skiing accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. He thought his life was over. But he went on to win many medals in the Paralympics and was even inducted in the Paralympics Hall of Fame. After this, Chris needed another challenge. So he decided to be the first differently abled person to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Since he couldn't use his legs, Chris would need to scale the 19,341 feet by pedaling a four-wheel mountain bike using only his arms. He raised the money, trained for the altitude, built a special bike, and recruited an international team to help him by laying down boards on the mountain. At times only moving 1 foot per minute, Chris finally approached the summit. He was only 100 feet from the top, but the boulders became too large and the wheels of the bike too small. There was no way that he could get through. Chris could see the top, but he couldn't get there by himself. His team persuaded him to let them carry him to the final distance to the top. Chris agreed, though he felt like he didn't really achieve his goal. Only later, Chris realized what he really learned from the experience. He said, "When I started telling the story to school kids, I realized the lesson was there all along. Nobody climbs a mountain alone. Nobody climbs a mountain alone." Whether it is Mount Kilimanjaro or a metaphorical mountain, a mountain of loneliness, a mountain of illness, of unemployment, of injustice, we don't get to the top alone. We need the love and the support of others. Family, friends, community can encourage us, support us, and yes, sometimes even carry us. We never really are just for ourselves. If we are, then what are we? What we are is missing our opportunity to live better and to strengthen one another. And once we recognize this, we realize the urgency of Hillel's concluding words. Im lo achshav, imatai. If not now, when? Achshav, now, today. We begin today because next Rosh Hashanah, when, please God, we're able to be back together in person here in our sanctuary, we want to be able to look back with pride on the steps we've taken to improve our lives and to improve the world. Begin today by talking at your Rosh Hashanah tables, whether in person or virtually, about what We Not Me means to you and how you will answer Hillel's questions this year. The Midrash teaches that in times of trouble, people vow, but in times of relief, they return to their own habits. In this time of trouble, we are making promises to ourselves about how we will live differently once things return to a new normal. Let's keep those promises and not return to old habits. Rather, let us see the challenges of our time as motivation to rededicate ourselves to our values, to strengthen our community, and to change the world for the better. One day, one act, and one life at a time. We will get through this, and we will emerge better and stronger when we live life as we, not me. If not now, when? It's time now to turn back to our service, to the Musaf service. I'll ask you to take up your Machzarim and turn to page 266 as Cantor Cohn will lead us in Chatzi Kaddish.